I'm Elton, and I make large paintings that float in the breeze or maybe move with the movement of the air as people walk past them. And I think about the landscape, I think about food and nourishment, and I think about time passing. And when I start a project, I'm thinking of a particular place, but I often like to look at that place from the air. And so I've called this workshop Armchair Traveller, because very often I use an app called Google Earth, which is free and anybody can use. And I use some of the images as starting points for paintings. So I thought today, if we had a look at a quick video, we're going to whiz around the world and look at some different places using Google Earth. I've looked at lots of different places, maybe places that we grow food, sacred sites, salt pans, bulb fields. You might want to find your own images or look at ones in the resource pack. I've started here with a drawing, and it's very quickly done. And I've used quite a small piece of paper because we don't have a lot of time today, but of course you could make a much larger piece if you wanted to. I've put a few images in your resource pack. This is one of a sacred site. This is one of Somerset. This is one from Saudi Arabia, which I think you just saw in the video. So if you want to pick one of those, that's great. I'm going to use this one of salt pans in Australia, which already looks like an abstract painting, so I think we can make quite a quick painting of this one. So I've made a quick drawing and I've stuck it down using a bit of tape, and that's just so that the paper doesn't buckle too much. I've got felt tip pens, I've got watercolour paint, I've got acrylic paint. I'm probably going to use the watercolour. I've got tissue paper, which you might want to use. You could cut or tear very rough pieces of that, maybe wrinkle them up and stick them down with glue. I've got paint brushes and a pencil, and I've got a little bit of paper just so I can dry my brush if I want to. So I'm just going to start with just a few colours and very quickly mixing them. I'm probably only going to use about 3 or 4 colours from this little palette here. First of all, I just want to make a nice kind of blue colour for these salt pans. So it's actually quite a greeny blue. So I'm going to start quite a greeny colour. Add a little bit of white as well. As you can see, there's certain colours in my palette that I use a lot of, particularly yellow. And I think that is because I often use colours I make myself from kitchen waste. So things like onion skins and pomegranate skins. And you get some really beautiful yellows and browns and oranges from them. And because they've got a lot of tannin in, they last quite a long time. So I'm just going to start with some of these colours. Just quickly fill in these spaces. And I think if you use a lot of water, you get quite a nice watery kind of feel. So very, very quickly filling in. And in my practice, these are really just starting points for bigger work. And I make a lot of them. I think it's quite nice to make lots and lots of small paintings. There we go. The thing I like about watercolour is its wateriness. You get some really nice marks, just filling in these shapes. I think it's nice to leave some spaces free actually as well. It's almost like some air getting into the painting. I think it's quite interesting looking at the images, looking down on the earth. Because when we think about a traditional landscape painting, we often think about a horizon line, and we often see a horizon line. But of course, so often nowadays, we're walking around looking down at our phones and looking at maps, and so we don't see a horizon line. And maybe the horizon line grounds us or anchors us. So perhaps it's interesting to think about these views as being quite freeing, floating around, looking down on the earth. Of course, you can use any colours you like. If you're thinking maybe about a sacred site, maybe you want to look at something like Stonehenge, you might want to think about colours that really think and show that idea of the land being sacred. If you're interested, there are some artists that you could look at that are relevant to this workshop. I think one artist that's really lovely to look at is an American called Richard Diebenkorn. And some of his work he made looking down from a small aircraft in the days before we really had available satellite imagery. And he made beautiful abstract paintings from the shapes in the landscape of California with kind of washed out colours that show how warm the landscape was. And if you're looking at one of the sacred sites, you might want to look at Paul Klee and some of the colours that he uses or used. He was very interested in thinking about mystical aspects of colour. He made some beautiful little watercolours. Or you could really take the patterns much further and look at someone like Gillian Ayres and her wonderful brightly coloured patterned paintings. There's an artist who is in the news a lot at the moment, and that is David Hockney. He often starts with an iPad and he uses some really vibrant colours. And one of the things he said recently was, "You can't cancel spring." And I thought that was a really hopeful thing to say. I'm going to put a little splash of green in there. Maybe a bit more of this. Got this kind of ochre colour here, which I quite like using. Use a bit of that in there. I'm just putting it in really, really quickly. I'm not worried about this being accurate in any way. I just want to have some patterns and some lovely splashy kind of marks. And if you want the paint to look a bit more, the colour to look a bit more vibrant, you can just sort of dot it in like that and float it, and then when it dries you'll get some lovely watery marks. I think it's really nice where the paint kind of mixes into other colours. So I think I'm going to leave this painting here just for the moment. I've got a mount And you could cut one of these, some card, or tear it from paper. And I'm just going to place that over the top. And then I've also, in your resource packs, I've put some little images of armchairs. And they're just armchairs from my home. And I was going to add those to my mount. So it almost looks like a screen that I'm sitting at home and looking at a place in Australia, the other side of the world, and making my own painting from it. I'll just untape this and I'll try and hold it up. It's still a bit wet, so it's going to start to drip. And that is an armchair traveller painting.